when family or other guests are in town and staying at our house, I like to go on an early morning walk. Partially, I go on these walks to give everyone a bit of time and space. Julian goes with me. He's the real early riser in our house. Sometimes our dog, Philo, joins me. And Jordan also. On many of these walks, we go to get a newspaper. Most mornings last weekend, as we walked to buy a paper for visiting family, I couldn't help but notice the articles above the fold on the front page. Many days in a row, nearly all the news above the fold was in some way about scandal, corruption, and the failings of people and institutions. You've probably seen this. Another state government corruption trial, local revelations and commitments to make reparations for abuse of minors by clergy, updates and analysis of the latest dysfunctions and scandals in D.C. These three things were all together one day above the fold on the front page of the newspaper. The church, the government at all levels, institutions that had at times been pillars that we lean on and so worthy of our trust. Can they be trusted? Should they be trusted? What do we do? How do we live? These moments of distrust can lead to corresponding wonderings about the state of our world and our place in it. Is the world worse than it's ever been in the past? Is everything unraveling and falling apart? When others have posed these questions to me and cite the news, whether the paper, the TV, or their news feed, I regularly respond with a story, and I know I've shared it with some of you before. Years ago, someone working in the news business shared a technical definition of news with me. Something is news if it's outside of the ordinary, if it doesn't fit with the regular, everyday expectations of how we relate to one another. In this context, the things that make news are a counter-narrative to what's normal and expected. When scandals erupt, when shootings happen, when war and violence permeate our news feeds, these are our reminders in a counterintuitive way that what is news is not the expected way of things. Otherwise, it wouldn't be news. Taking care of our neighbors near and far, living in harmony, working for the common good, loving and raising our families, showing gratitude for one another, celebrating the good and faithful work of good and faithful people. These things are not newsworthy. Yes, they are to be celebrated and rejoiced in, but they're not newsworthy. And perhaps they shouldn't be either. For if news is the unusual and unexpected, then having most news be quote-unquote bad news means that our world and our society is still mostly overwhelmingly full of good, ordinary people living good, ordinary lives. I don't say any of this to diminish tragedy, war, violence, any of these things when they're reported. I simply say it as another way to think about your and my ordinary, everyday lives in the world in which we live. If there was going to be an above-the-fold front page headline when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness in our story from Exodus this morning, the above-the-fold headline would be how serpents killed, and the big news would be that serpents healed. The news would be how odd and counterintuitive it is to look at this venomous creature as both bad and good. The people's grumbling on their way to a new homeland? We're human beings. We know that's not news. The unexpected means and ways that God drew the people closer to one another and to God, that is newsworthy. The big above-the-fold message from this gospel lesson that includes a verse we know so well. Well, perhaps the big above-the-fold news isn't even in John 3:16. The big news is the context of the story. That's what would have been above the fold. A religious leader, Nicodemus, has come to this new person doing this new way of relating to God, Jesus, in the middle of the night, to feel him out with curiosity and to ask some questions. And Jesus responded by confounding Nicodemus with a new way of thinking, a new and radical rediscovery with a hinting of this new promised way of God. Perhaps our big news in worship today as we gather is that instead of a verse of division, John 3:16, this publicly displayed article of faith, if you will, John 3:16 and its surrounding verses are a means of unity and clarity in revealing the purposes of God. This text reminds us and shows us of the enormity of God's love, which is the big new promise. God so loved the world, it says in big, bold, all caps letters. You can't read these verses from Scripture through another lens than love. God so loved the world, God did not send Jesus to condemn, but to save, to redeem, to give new pathways to live. Look at the serpent, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live. God will and God did lift Jesus up as a sign of great love. Love we can't control, love we can't fully understand, but rather a love that at best we can receive, spend some time and dwell in. It is well. We're about to sing here this morning. And a little bit later we'll sing about love so amazing, love so divine. We sing these words, we can sing these words because of the enormous and unconditional love of God, who loves us so and will go to such great lengths to express this love to us and for us and for all of creation. God so loved the world. God so loved and loves you and me. This is really newsworthy. We forget that. It's newsworthy because it's not how the news of our day or any day tells us the world or God is supposed to work. God's enormous, life-changing love is newsworthy because in all the other news events, including the news we probably regularly tell ourselves about our own lives and the lives of others, what we say is that we and others aren't worthy of love. That as far as the world's concerned, we're not enough, so we're not to be loved. But the ways of God are different. These ways of God, this love of God has the power to redeem and to save and to show and give us new life, new worth and new hope. God's ways that we hear this morning, and each time we gather and every time we experience God out in the everyday ordinary of our lives, God's ways are news, gigantic, above the fold good news. Because God's love is not a regular love. It's a love so amazing, so divine, and so abnormal. That is to say, it's newsworthy, celebratory even. Go, live, dwell, lean into this good news of God's extraordinary love for you and for all. Amen.